The humid air was the first thing I noticed as we stepped off the plane. Even through the blindfold James insisted I wear, I could sense the change. My son's laughter bubbled behind me as he led me forward. "We're almost there, Mom," he teased. "I hope you like surprises, beautiful." Beautiful. That word carried more weight than he realized. It was the first time in a long while anyone had called me that. We walked for what felt like minutes before he helped me into a car. I felt the seat beneath me and the soft rumble of the engine as we began to move. The tension, the excitement, it built with every turn. "James," I chided, half laughing, half nervous. "Just tell me where we're going." He refused. His tone stayed light, teasing. When we stopped, I felt his hands on mine as he guided me out. The air smelled different now. Saltier, richer. And when he removed the blindfold, I gasped. In front of me stretched a view so breathtaking it almost didn't feel real. Blue skies kissed an ocean so clear I could see the sand beneath the water. Palm trees swayed in a gentle breeze, their shadows dancing across pristine white sands. "Welcome to Costa Rica," James said with a grin, spreading his arms like an entertainer unveiling a masterpiece. My heart swelled, both with the view and the effort my son had made to make my birthday special. How did you even plan this?" My voice was barely more than a whisper. He shrugged, trying to look nonchalant, though the pride in his eyes betrayed him. "You deserve it, Mom. I wanted to give you something good after everything we've been through." The reminder of the past weighed on us for a moment. My husband's betrayal, James's heartbreak. It had been a rough year for us both. But here, standing under the warmth of the Costa Rican sun, the pain felt distant, like something we'd finally outrun. He pulled me into a hug, his arms solid and reassuring. "This is your time now. Just let go and enjoy it." I wanted to thank him, but words felt inadequate. Instead, I rested my head on his shoulder, letting the serenity of the moment seep in. Our villa was even more stunning than I could have imagined. Perched above the water, its balcony offered an unobstructed view of the ocean. That first evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and lavender, James and I sat outside, sipping on fresh coconut water. "Do you remember when Dad used to take us to the lake during summer vacations?" he asked, his voice soft. I nodded, smiling wistfully. "Do. Those were good times." He looked at me then, his eyes earnest. "I want this to feel like that. If happy." "It already does," I assured him, reaching over to squeeze his hand. The days passed in a blissful blur. We hiked through lush rainforests, swam in the warm ocean, and indulged in local dishes that made me wonder if I'd ever truly tasted food before. James was my guide, my anchor, and my friend through it all. But more than anything, this trip was a balm, a chance for us to heal. One evening, as we strolled along the beach under a canopy of stars, James stopped suddenly. "I want to say something, Mom." I turned to him, curious. "I don't know where I'd be without you," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "You've always been there for me, even when things were falling apart." His vulnerability caught me off guard, and I reached up to brush the hair from his forehead, a gesture as instinctive as breathing. "I'll always be here for you, James," I promised. And in that moment, beneath the starlit Costa Rican sky, I realized something profound. No matter what life threw our way, we'd weather it together. Because love, the kind that binds a mother and son, wasn't just about blood or obligation. It was about choice. And we'd chosen each other. The waves lapped gently at our feet as James and I strolled along the shore, the sound of the water a soothing rhythm beneath our quiet conversation. The night was alive with the soft chirping of insects and the faint hum of distant music drifting from the resort. The moon cast its silver light across the ocean, making the waves glisten like liquid stars. Out of nowhere, James stopped and turned to me with a mischievous grin. "All right, Mom," he said, rolling up his pant legs. "You've been too serious. Time for some fun." I laughed, caught off guard. "James, what are you?" Before I could finish, he grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the water. "James!" I squealed, my laughter bubbling over as I resisted. I'm not dressed for this. That's the point, he countered, his own laughter ringing out light and carefree. The cool water kissed my ankles first, then my calves as we waded deeper. I protested half-heartedly, but his excitement was contagious. Before long, I was splashing him as he dodged and retaliated, both of us giggling like children. At one point I stumbled and James caught me by the arm, steadying me. His grip was firm yet gentle, and the look on his face was one of pure joy. "Careful, beautiful," he teased. "Can't have you falling on me." His words, casual and playful, sent a warmth through me that had nothing to do with the tropical air. I hadn't felt this carefree, this alive in years. "Beautiful, huh?" I teased back, narrowing my eyes at him as we stood knee-deep in the water. "You are," he said, his grin softening into something more genuine. His tone was so sincere, so full of affection that I didn't know how to respond. Eventually, the chill of the water became too much, and we returned to the shore. I flopped onto the soft, cool sand with a sigh of contentment, the grains clinging to my damp skin. James stretched out beside me, propping himself up on one elbow. "You're really glowing tonight," he said, his voice low and thoughtful. I turned my head to look at him, surprised by his tone. "It's the moonlight," I said lightly, brushing a strand of hair away from my face. "It's not just the moonlight," he replied, his eyes locking onto mine. "You look happy. Free." His gaze lingered and I felt my cheeks flush. "That's because I am," I admitted softly. "This trip. It's everything I didn't know I needed." He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Good. That's what I wanted. You've been through so much, Mom. You deserve to feel like this all the time." I looked away, letting his words sink in. The sound of the waves filled the silence between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like we were sharing something unspoken, a bond that went beyond words. "Thank you, James," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "Not just for this trip, but for being you. You've grown into such an incredible man, and I don't think I tell you that enough." His expression softened even more. "You don't have to tell me. No. And if I'm a good man, it's because of you." The sincerity in his voice, the intensity in his gaze. It was almost overwhelming. I reached out and touched his hand, my fingers brushing against his. "You're everything I could have hoped for, James," I said, my voice trembling slightly. We stayed like that for a while, lying side by side on the sand watching the stars. It was one of those rare moments where everything felt right, like the universe had paused just for us. Eventually, James shifted, sitting up and brushing the sand from his arms. He reached down to help me up, pulling me to my feet effortlessly. "Come on, let's head back," he said, his hand still holding mine. We walked back to the villa, our hands swinging slightly between us. His grip was steady, warm, a quiet reassurance that, no matter what the future held, we had each other. That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed the evening in my mind. The laughter, the way he looked at me, the way he made me feel, alive, cherished and seen. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to believe that life wasn't just about enduring, it was about living. And James had given me that gift. The morning sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains of our villa, casting a warm golden hue across the room. I stretched lazily, still wrapped in the bliss of the previous evening. The sound of the waves outside was soothing, and I felt lighter than I had in years. My thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. "Mom, are you awake?" James's voice called, and before I could respond, the door creaked open. I sat up, smiling. "Good morning, James." He stepped inside, his smile wide and mischievous. Without a word, he crossed the room, leaned down and kissed my cheek. It was soft, fleeting, yet utterly unexpected. My heart fluttered, and I felt a rush of warmth that left me momentarily speechless. "Good morning, beautiful," he said casually, as if the kiss was the most natural thing in the world. Before I could process the moment, he held up a blindfold, dangling it playfully. "Ready for another surprise?" "James," I laughed, shaking my head. "What are you up to now? You'll see, he teased, already moving to tie the fabric gently over my eyes. Blindfolded and intrigued, I let him take my hand and lead me outside. The warmth of the sun kissed my skin, and the soft grains of sand beneath my feet told me we were on the beach. The sound of the ocean grew louder, accompanied by the occasional cry of gulls overhead. Just a little further, he said, his voice filled with excitement. The sensation of climbing stairs startled me, and I clutched his hand tighter. Where are we going? You'll find out, he replied with a chuckle. Finally he stopped, positioning me carefully. All right, you can take it off now. I pulled the blindfold away and blinked against the bright sunlight. Before me was a stunning white yacht, pristine and gleaming under the morning sky. Its sleek lines and polished surface made it look like something out of a dream. James, I whispered, unable to hide my awe. Surprise, he said, his arms outstretched. You rented a yacht. He grinned, looking almost bashful. I wanted to do something special for you. Come on. He helped me onto the deck, where a beautifully arranged breakfast awaited us. Fresh fruit, pastries, champagne, and soft music playing in the background. James, this is incredible, I said, turning to him with wide eyes. He stepped closer, his gaze steady. You deserve it, Mom. All of it. His words were simple, but the emotion behind them hit me deeply. He pulled me into a hug, and I melted into his embrace, feeling a closeness that went beyond anything I could have anticipated. As we sailed away from the shore, I marveled at how confident he seemed at the helm. James moved with an ease and assurance, adjusting the sails and steering as though he'd been doing it his entire life. Where did you learn this? Asked, genuinely curious. He shot me a grin over his shoulder. A friend taught me a while ago. Thought it might come in handy someday. I found myself watching him more closely. His strong hands gripping the wheel, the way the sun highlighted the angles of his face. There was something magnetic about him, a charm I couldn't quite put into words. Enjoying the view, he asked, catching me off guard. I flushed, laughing to cover my embarrassment. The ocean is beautiful. So are you, he said smoothly. His eyes meeting mine for a moment that felt like an eternity. I looked away, pretending to admire the horizon. My heart raced, and I couldn't deny the thrill of his attention. After a while, he dropped anchor near a secluded cove, the water so clear it seemed almost unreal. He turned to me, his grin boyish and full of mischief. Let's go for a swim. Here. In the middle of nowhere? I asked, feigning reluctance. It's perfect, he insisted. No one around, just us. He stripped off his shirt, revealing a toned physique that made my breath catch. Before I could react, he dove gracefully into the water, resurfacing moments later with a wide smile. Come on, Mom, he called, splashing playfully. Laughing, I kicked off my sandals and joined him, the cool water a refreshing contrast to the heat of the day. We swam together, the ocean surrounding us like a private paradise. At one point, James swam close, his eyes locked on mine. You know, I don't think I've ever seen you this happy, he said softly. I haven't felt this happy in a long time, I admitted, my voice catching. He reached out, brushing a strand of wet hair from my face. His touch lingered, and I felt my heart skip. Good, he murmured. You deserve to feel like this every day. In that moment, floating together in the endless blue, everything else fell away. It was just us, connected by something deeper than I could put into words. The yacht, the ocean, the laughter. It all felt like a dream. But the way James looked at me, the warmth in his touch, that felt undeniably real. The sun climbed higher in the sky, warming the deck of the yacht as James and I stretched out on the loungers to soak in the golden rays. The gentle rocking of the boat and the sound of the waves against the hull created a peaceful rhythm that made it easy to relax. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth seep into my skin, feeling a rare sense of tranquility. The breeze played with my hair, and for a moment, it was as if nothing else existed but the sun, the sea, and the bond one shared with my son. Then, without warning, I felt his hands on my shoulders. Relax, Mom, James said softly. You're looking a little tense. I laughed, though the tenderness in his voice caught me off guard. James, what are you doing? Giving you a massage, he said matter-of-factly, as though this was the most natural thing in the world. Before I could protest, his hands began to knead gently into my shoulders, his touch firm but careful. I let out a small sigh, the tension melting away almost instantly. Wow, I said, half teasing. You're full of surprises, aren't you? He chuckled, his hands moving to the base of my neck. There's more where this came from. You deserve to be pampered. As he worked his way down my back, his voice dropped into a conversational tone. You know, he started, a note of amusement creeping into his words. I showed one of my friends your picture before we came on this trip. I raised an eyebrow, though my eyes remained closed. Oh, and why would you do that? I don't know, he said casually, though there was an edge of something, hesitation perhaps, in his tone. Just came up. He wanted to know where I was going and who I was traveling with. I felt his hands pause briefly, then continue. And, prompted. And he said. James hesitated, then let out a small laugh. He said, wow, what a beautiful mom you have. His words made me smile, though there was something else in his voice, something almost defensive. That's sweet of him, I replied lightly. I didn't like it, James admitted, his voice quieter now. The way he said it. Like he was interested. I turned my head slightly to glance at him, catching the faintest flicker of jealousy in his expression. You didn't like it. Tease. Why not? Shouldn't I feel flattered? James's lips twitched into a half-smile, though his eyes betrayed something deeper. I don't know. It just didn't sit right with me, that's all. There was a pause as his hands moved to my arms, his touch light and careful. Well, I said finally, a playful edge to my voice. You can tell your friend that I'm busy. James's hands stilled for a moment, and I felt him tense slightly. Busy? Yes, I said, opening my eyes and turning to him with a sly smile. Busy with another young man. He stared at me, his surprise giving way to a grin that spread slowly across his face. Oh, really? He asked, raising an eyebrow. I nodded, leaning closer and giving him an exaggerated wink. Really? He laughed then, the sound rich and genuine, and the tension that had briefly hovered between us melted away. You're something else, you know that, he said, shaking his head as he sat back on his lounger. I try, I replied, settling back down with a satisfied smile. The moment felt light-hearted and fun, but beneath the surface, there was a quiet intimacy that lingered. James's protectiveness, his subtle jealousy, it all added a layer of complexity to our relationship that I hadn't fully anticipated. As the sun continued its slow climb, we fell into a comfortable silence, the occasional breeze cooling our sun-warmed skin. The yacht swayed gently, the perfect cocoon of solitude in the middle of the endless ocean. But even as I closed my eyes and let myself drift into the serenity of the moment, I couldn't help but feel the quiet weight of James's gaze on me. His presence steady and sure in a way that filled me with an unexpected warmth. This trip was turning into more than just a getaway. It was a rediscovery of a connection that felt deeper than words, rooted in trust, affection, and something I couldn't yet name. The late afternoon sun began its slow descent, casting a warm golden glow over the yacht. The gentle rocking of the boat made the moment feel even more surreal, as though we were suspended in time. I watched James disappear below deck, returning moments later with a chilled bottle of champagne and 2 glasses in hand. Celebration time, he declared, his grin infectious. Celebration. For what? I asked, sitting up and brushing the sand-colored towel off my legs. He tilted his head, feigning thoughtfulness. For you. For this trip. For how happy you've seemed these last few days. He popped the cork with a practiced ease, the bubbly liquid spilling lightly over the rim as he poured us each a glass. I accepted mine with a smile, the cool stem of the glass refreshing against my fingertips. You really thought of everything, didn't you? I wanted this to be perfect, he said simply. his eyes meeting mine with an earnestness that made my breath catch. We clinked glasses, the soft chime blending with the sound of the waves, and I took a sip, the crisp champagne fizzing pleasantly on my tongue. James sat beside me, closer than before, and for a moment we just watched the horizon together. The sky was a palette of oranges, pinks, and purples, the kind of beauty that felt almost too perfect to be real. "You know," he said after a moment, his voice low, "I was nervous about this trip." I turned to him, surprised. "You? Nervous? I can't imagine that." He smiled faintly, looking down at his glass. "I wanted everything to be just right. I wanted to see you happy. And now that I do." He trailed off, glancing at me with an expression I couldn't quite place. "You've done more than enough," I assured him, reaching out to touch his hand. "This trip has been magical." His fingers brushed against mine, lingering for a moment before he turned to face me fully. The weight of his gaze was overwhelming, filled with something unspoken but undeniable. "Mom," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper, "you have no idea how much you mean to me." I swallowed, my heart pounding in my chest. There was something different about the way he said it, something that made the air between us feel charged. Before I could respond, he leaned in, closing the distance between us. His lips brushed against mine, tentative at first, testing, as though waiting for me to pull away. But I didn't. The kiss deepened, slow and deliberate, and I felt a surge of emotions I couldn't fully comprehend. It was tender, careful, but filled with an intensity that left me breathless. When we finally pulled apart, the world seemed to spin slightly, though whether from the champagne or the kiss, I wasn't sure. "James," I began, my voice trembling. He placed a finger gently against my lips, silencing me. "You don't have to say anything," he said, his voice steady but his eyes searching mine. I needed you to know how I feel." I blinked, unsure of what to say, of how to process the whirlwind of emotions coursing through me. The sincerity in his expression was impossible to ignore, as was the warmth of his hand still resting lightly on mine. The sun dipped lower, casting the world in shades of amber and gold. Everything felt heightened, like the universe had conspired to make this moment unforgettable. We sat there in silence for a while, the champagne untouched, the kiss lingering between us like a secret shared only with the sea.